This week's Parsha is Parshas Shemais. It's not just Parshas Shemais, right? The Torah portion this week is Shemais. But it's both Parshas Shemais, which means it is the Torah portion of Shemais, and it's also, we are beginning Sefer Shemais, the book of Shemais. Right? So there are the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, which are Bereshis, Shemais, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we just finished last week with Parshas Vayechi. It was Shabbos Chazak. We finished the first book of Bereshis, of Genesis. This week we're starting the book of Shemais, Sefer Shemais, the book of Exodus. And the Parsha is also called Parshas Shemais. Now, we're going to come at this from a couple of different angles. At one level, we could explain that the reason it's called Parshas Shemais and Sefer Shemais, why this week's Torah portion is named Shemais and why the whole book is called Shemais, is because the first word that is at all memorable and not a generic word that's, shows up in just about every verse in the Torah is Shemais. Ve'ele Shemais b'nei Yisroel, these are the names of the Jews who came to Egypt. You're not going to call it Ve'ele and these, because that's super generic. So Shemais names, okay, that's a bit more specific. We know where we're at. And there is something to that, obviously. I'm not going to we're not burying our heads in the sand and saying, well, that's not really the reason they called that. It just seems like it. Just, if you look at every single Torah portion, it just seems like every single time, it looks like they chose the first memorable word in the Torah portion to name, but really it's got nothing to do with that. It just looks like that every single time, all 53 times. No, let's be real, that's part of it, practically. But there's more to it. If, right, the Creator, Hashem, God, absolutely infinite, set everything up and designed and engineered everything to work together in exquisite perfection, that means that if the wording is such that this ended up being the name of the Torah portion and the name of the book, then that's what it's supposed to be. So it's not just, this is the name, happens to be, this is the first memorable word, it's purely just functional and let's keep going. No. If that was chosen for the name, there's a message here. And the reason that this is so real is because there's a very big difference between Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew. By Hebrew, the reason I said Lashon HaKodesh as opposed to Ivrit, because Ivrit, there are multiple related languages, let's say, that we could refer to as Hebrew. Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, means the original Hebrew of the Bible, of the Torah, the original Hebrew with which Hashem brought the world into being. Right? The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, "Ba'asarim ha'mamos nevra olam," the world was brought into being with 10 utterances. Hashem spoke. Hashem said, "Let there be light," and light came into being. In general, language is super important, right? One of the primary distinguishing characteristics that sets human beings apart from animals, or some people would say that set humans, Homo sapiens, apart from other animals. And both of those ways of looking at it have a place in Torah. Regardless, one of the most important defining characteristics that separates human beings and animals is the ability to communicate with articulate speech. Animals can communicate, some more than others, some with, greater degree of specificity than others, but there is no articulate speech outside of humanity, outside of Homo sapiens. The ability to have words, to have language, articulate speech, goes hand in hand with the other big factor, which is the ability to understand abstract concepts. Right? Animals can think, they can know, they can understand, but animals in general understand things that are concrete. Hungry, food, hunt. Thirsty, water, go, drink. Tired, sleep. Cold, shelter. Animals can't think about abstract, they can't do trigonometry because it's not related to anything concrete. They can't think about philosophy, about meaning and purpose because it's not concrete. And when you look biologically, the two biggest factors that distinguish humans from animals are articulate speech and the ability to understand abstract concepts. And they likely go very much hand in hand and are very deeply related. Both of them are related to the disproportionately larger prefrontal cortex that we have, which both of those things are related to, and they're related to each other. Without articulate speech and language, we wouldn't be able to think abstract concepts. Language, words, communication is extremely important. It's part of what makes us humans as opposed to animals. Functionally, there are no rules about what something needs to be called. The choice of words is arbitrary. The fact that this is called a whiteboard marker, a dry erase marker, and this is called a tissue box, is arbitrary. If this were called a marker and this were called a tissue box and we were all on the same page about it, it would be perfectly fine. There's no issue here. Right? Because the point of language is to communicate. As long as we're all on the same page about what a word means, it could mean anything. If we're on the same page, it's functional, we can communicate, we can talk to each other, we can understand each other. It's all good. It doesn't matter what it means as long as we're on the same page. And what's the proof? A lot of different languages and they all work. There's lots of different ways of referring to every single thing and they're all functional as long as there are multiple people on the same page. It works. When it comes to Lashon HaKodesh, it's different. The choice of words is not arbitrary because Lashon HaKodesh is not just a means of interpersonal communication between human beings. As long as the function of a language is interpersonal communication between human beings, as long as you have multiple people on the same page about what a word means, we're good. What the word is completely arbitrary. Lashon HaKodesh, the sacred tongue, is not just a means of communication between human beings. This is the language that Hashem spoke, that the Creator spoke to bring things into being. The words in the Hebrew language, are vehicles for divine creative energy, and the divine creative energy of God that brings light into being is carried, is transmitted, is communicated by the Hebrew word Or, which means light. So when God said, let there be Yehi let there be visible electromagnetic radiation came into being. Because this word is actually a vehicle for the divine creative force that makes visible electromagnetic radiation, aka visible light, exist. And the structure of the letters in Kabbalah, sometimes we have conversations which breaks down a word and the meaning of the word and the letters and the shapes of the letters, and we can see sometimes how the shapes of the letters actually are a layer of representation of the energy that's being carried by the letters, being carried by the word, and how that relates to the things that the word refers to. It's very real. So the name that something is referred to with in Lashon HaKodesh, it's not just an arbitrary way of referring to it so that we can communicate. This word is a vehicle that carries the divine creative force that makes it exist. So if Shemos, this word, is the name of this week's parsha and the name of this entire book, the book of Exodus, the second of the 5 books, if the name in Lashon HaKodesh according to Torah is Shemos, That means Shemos, the word Shemos, and the meaning of the word Shemos represent the entirety of this book at some level. The whole theme and message of this whole second book, the whole Sefer Shemos, the whole book of Genesis, there's something very fundamental to this whole book that's represented or communicated in the word Shemos, names of. Because this is the word that is responsible for this being and being, existing. Interesting choice of words to refer to or to communicate the theme of a whole one of the 20% of the Torah, of the first layer of expression of Torah, the Chamisha Torah, the 5 books of Torah. Names of. Bereshis in the beginning, okay, yeah. Shmos, names of. Seems like maybe a little specific. How does that represent the theme of, or carry a message for the theme of this whole book? So let's take a step back and first think about, okay, so what is this book about? In English, the Sefer of Shemos is referred to as Exodus. Exodus meaning the going out from, exit, leaving Egypt, because the first few Torah portions of this book do talk about leaving Egypt. But if we contrast the first book, Sefer Bereshis, versus the second book, Sefer Shemos, especially in the context of what we know to be the purpose of existence, of why we're all here, they are two distinct, necessary, important, and distinctly different phases. What does that mean? Why does the universe exist? Time and space, mass and energy, all of that exists. Why? For us to make a dwelling place for the Creator in this physical layer of reality. Dir b'tachtonim. Right? The Midrash says, Nis'ava Kadosh Baruch Hu liyas ledir b'tachtonim. The Holy One, blessed be He, had a desire to have a dwelling place in the lowest layer of reality, i.e. this physical layer of reality. Okay, so task number 1, bring this layer of reality into being. So Hashem did that, created the many layers all the way down until this physical layer of reality. Task number 2, let's say, perhaps, loosely speaking, is populate it with all kinds of species of, microorganisms and plants and animals. And ultimately, the last one to be brought into being, people who can then use our ability to understand abstract ideas, to understand purpose and meaning, and to understand morality and ethics, and have a sense of why we're here, to then, and the ability to make intentional decisions based on purpose and meaning, to then work with all of the things that are in the world to channel divinity into the world, to integrate godliness into the world. Channeling divinity into the world obviously depends on interacting with the world. We've talked about this at length many times, many different angles of it. If we look at the first book, Sefer Bereshis, the book of Genesis, creation, it starts off with the creation of the world. It then continues with, the history of mankind. Justin Trudeau resigned, so I don't have to say humankind. I'm allowed to say mankind. And all the way down until we have, and we don't have every single person who existed, obviously, but we have the beginning of Adam and Chav and their children and several generations, and then we have, the 10 generations in Noach and 10 generations and then Avraham Avinu and Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Yaakov's sons, Yosef goes down to Egypt. They all come down to Egypt because Yosef's there and, the dreams, and then he gathers all the grain, etc. They all end up in Egypt. And they're living a pretty good life because Yosef is effectively the de facto ruler, commander-in-chief of this superpower known as Egypt at the time. So his family, his siblings were living a good life until the moment he passed away, which is where last week's Torah portion ended. He was passed away. He was buried in Egypt. At that point, the tables turned. And because Yosef wasn't around anymore, in that position of authority to guarantee his family a good life, their life quickly became not so good anymore, and they became enslaved, etc., and that's the beginning of the slavery in Egypt. Everything up until this point was, obviously there were many points of things that happened and sparks were elevated along the way, etc. But all of that really, the whole Sefer Bereshis, the whole book of Genesis is really the setup. It's setting the stage and putting things in place. We went into Egypt, Egypt being a place that was deeply impure and had a lot of negativity. We stayed there for the period of time that was necessary for us to extract and elevate all the sparks of divinity that were embedded within the land. Once that work was done, we were able to leave Egypt, and then we went to the desert, got the Torah, and continued to the land of Israel. And this is why actually the Torah talks about Jews not going back to Egypt. Why? Because the work that we needed to do there was done. We're now elevating sparks in the rest of the world. So, if the first book, Bereshis, Genesis, was setting the stage, putting things in place, bringing the physical universe into being, populating, having, the first 20 odd generations of humanity until we ended up in Egypt, 22, let's say. 10 from Adam to Noach, 10 from Noach to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef. So all of that is setting the stage, and then in the second book, Sefer Shemos, this is where the fun, the not very fun begins, where the work begins, where the meat and potatoes of what it's really about begins. Being in Egypt, living there, not with the cushy protection of Yosef where we all just got to sit on the side and do whatever we felt like, but getting dragged deeply into the minutiae and the hard work. And in doing that, we interacted with the land, with the people, with the place in a way that gave us the opportunity to elevate whatever needed to be elevated there. So if we look at these two books, the book of the Sefer Bereshis, the book of Genesis, as setting the stage and getting everything in place, and this second Sefer, the second book of Shemos, of Exodus, as actually where the work begins, the question is, if the theme of this book is, let's call it the work of living, being embedded, elevating sparks, integrating divinity into the world, etc., what does that have to do with the word or the name Shemos, names of? If we think about what a name is, on one hand, names are quite important. Right? If we didn't have names, there would be a whole lot of that which we were all told when we were very young that it's very rude to do, which is, hey, you. There'd be no names, there'd be no way. Hey, you, no, the one with the blondish hair, no, the one that's next to you on the right with the slightly light. Names are important, functionally. But they're only actually important to the extent that we need them functionally. Hypothetically, if someone lives on a desert island by themselves and they never see another person and they're never going to see another person, they don't need a name. And you know what? If someone ends up stranded on a desert island by themselves, maybe 20 years down the road, they might actually forget what the name was. They may have forgotten because they've never heard it and never used it. So what's a name on one hand is something very specific to us. That's why they're effective. If everybody has the same name, right? If you walk into 7-7 and you say 7-7 and you say, hey Mendy, and everybody turns around, it's like, yeah, okay, we're going to need some last names. If you walk into a yeshiva in Satmar and you say, hey Yoelish, and everybody turns around, you're going to need a last name. Right? So it's the specificity and the uniqueness of the name that makes it functional and effective and helpful and useful. So the whole idea of a name is that it's individual, it's specific, it's personal. As much as a name is individual and specific and personal, it's individual and specific and personal as opposed to being global and collective. It's the thing that identifies each of us as an individual. But a name is not who we are. If a person lives on a desert island and forgets their name, they're no less of a person because they forgot their name. The name is not the person. The name is something that is associated with the person, that serves the person, but it's not the person. Hypothetically, you can have a very complete and functional person without a name. There are going to be some, technical difficulties in their functioning, maybe, in communicating with them and getting their attention, but it doesn't make them any less of a person.
To a point, like saying that someone is Jewish, that is who they are, and that's a name. It's not like Bailey or whatever, but it's a name to describe them, and it is who they are.
But that is a word that refers to who they are. Right? If a person had that identity, they had that soul, they are who they are, and there happened to not be a word to refer to it, it wouldn't make them any less who they are, right? So that word refers to that identity, which is who they are, but it's still not the word itself. It's the thing that the word refers to. Make sense?
Yeah.
So the name is not the person. Now, this idea of a name is something that is a very, very fundamental metaphor. The name is used as a metaphor for something that it's very important for us to understand about Hashem, about God, about the Creator. And the context, one of the ways that this is used is that Hashem creates with His name. Right? We have different names. You have Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei, and Elohim, and each of these names refer to different behavioral characteristics of the Creator, but the absolute infinity of the Creator is not a name, doesn't need a name. In order to bring things into being, for the world to exist the way it does, right? If God is absolutely infinite and God doesn't have parts and God can't be defined or referred to with any name or anything. You basically can't say anything about God in an absolute sense without it being incorrect. Technically incorrect. We do what we can and we can only do what we can do. So we obviously have to use the words that we have to discuss and to understand as much as we can about the Creator. But because the Creator is absolutely infinite, and that which naturally emanates and radiates from the Creator, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Or Ein Sof, people often confuse Or Ein Sof, infinite light, with being Hashem, God. It's not. Now, sometimes it's used synonymously when we're, zoomed out enough that we're not distinguishing between them. But Or Ein Sof, Or, the infinite light is radiation. It's radiance. It radiates from something. In the metaphor of light, of Or, God, Hashem, is not Or Ein Sof. Hashem is the Ma'or, the source of light, that which radiates, the infinite light. So Or Ein Sof technically is not Hashem, it's that which radiates naturally from Hashem. That which radiates from absolute infinity is naturally going to be infinite by nature. So Hashem's radiance, everything that just radiates naturally from Hashem is infinite. So how do we end up with this universe that's very specifically defined? It's physical, there's mass and there's energy, and mass is not energy and energy is not mass, and time is not space and space is not time, and etc., etc. And everything is defined and very limited. So within the absolute infinity of God, there is the ability to limit, to calculate, to reduce, to limit that radiance as God chooses and wishes to limit it and reduce it. And then there are these intentionally limited, let's say, radiances that bring things into being. And these are these divine creative energies that are carried by these words that make things exist, that bring things into being. So these are God's radiance, but they are specifically and intentionally limited, reduced, defined. These are not Hashem. These are not God. They are godliness. What does godliness mean? Godliness, and again, people can often talk about godliness and miss the distinction between godliness and God. In Hebrew, Elokus, godliness, and Elokim, God. Godliness means that which is godly, that which is godlike, that which is related to God, that which resembles God, that which is close to God, etc. That's godliness, that which is godly. That's not God. So these are things that are related to the Creator, connected to the Creator, associated with the Creator, but they're not the Creator. They are something that exists outside of the Creator, outside of Hashem. Just like a person's name is associated with the person, related to the person, connected to the person, but it's not part of the person. A name is something separate to the person. So there is often talk of Hashem's name creating with His name, etc., because the name, a literal name as we know it, which is something that is unique and specific to the person, but not part of the person, something exterior to and secondary to the person, so too, whatever is involved in actually bringing things into being is associated with Hashem, comes from Hashem, is an expression of Hashem, but it's not Hashem Himself. It's something that is secondary to Hashem. The same way that the world is brought into being using Hashem's name, i.e., that which is associated with Hashem but is not part of Hashem Himself, is secondary to Hashem. This week's Torah portion opens up and says, "Va'ele shmos b'nei Yisroel habayim mitzrayim." These are the names of the Jews. That or who? So the correct way of translating it at the simplest level will be, these are the names of the Jews, or these are the names of the sons of Yaakov, the sons of Israel, Haboy Mitzrayim, who came into Egypt. Now, the way that we are going to interpret this, it's not going to be who, it's going to be that or which. These are the names of the sons of Israel, that or which came into Egypt. It wasn't the essence of who they were. Who we are is not affected by our circumstances, it's not affected by our surroundings. We interact with the world and life is filled with challenges, and we are here to do things, and the things that we're here to do, every one of our journeys involves difficulties and struggles and challenges and lots of beauty and joy, and they're complex and messy. And ultimately, if we can understand it and relate to it correctly, it's all beautiful. It's just not all easy. But at the end of the day, the part of us that is interacting with the world, and interacting with the world carries some risk. Right? There's a risk of being influenced by the world rather than influencing the world. And we've talked about this idea that some people, have separate names when they go to work, just to make sure that they're separating that part of their life from their real self. We don't do that because our approach specifically is we want to take our actual real self into the world and share what we have, share our values, share what we know, share the divinity, share the message with the world, integrate godliness into the world, elevate the world. So we want to be engaged in the world. That being said, it's understandable why some people are hesitant to go there, because the moment that it's, in a sense, actually, I think this just sort of landed for me, a very perhaps appropriate metaphor is, people who are, let's say, spies, or people who do maybe undercover work, for like intelligence or a police department. Sometimes when they're doing the most important work, it can get extremely messy and traumatizing and can really hurt people for life. Why? Because if the best spy work involves really integrating into the target society, right? Eli Cohen, for example. May his remains be recovered and receive a appropriate burial. Take it from Jan Mamish, he deserves it. Even better, we should have Mashiach and he should be back.
Amen.
But, the last mission that he went on before he left, he didn't want to go. Why? Because he was tearing himself into pieces. He would go there and embed himself, and the reason he was so successful was because, and the reason that he, saved so many lives was because he was so effective at really embedding himself and becoming a part of the culture, a part of the society, a part of the top brass. And to do that without actually getting caught up in that is probably, if you're going all the way and doing the best job possible, it's probably borderline impossible to not get caught up in it a little bit. Right? And that's why people who do, deep undercover work, whether it's for intelligence or for police department, whatever it is, it's very, very difficult work. It's emotionally difficult, and one mission sometimes can leave someone with challenges that they're going to be struggling with for the rest of their lives. Because in order to fulfill the mission successfully, they really have to become attached to the people that they ultimately see as an enemy or as a threat, which is why they're doing the work they're doing. And the better a job they do, the more they're at risk of getting hurt and getting confused and getting messed up. And it's the same thing here. We want to be involved in the world so that we can be a channel for godliness, to share our values, to share the light of Torah with the world. But it carries a substantial degree of risk. And it's costly, and it requires a lot of maintenance. It requires daily downtime to slow down and to remember who we are and why we're here and what this is all about. So that when we go out, we are the influencer and not the influencee. There was actually someone who several decades ago, I didn't hear the story firsthand, but as far as I've heard, it was said about the Satmar of Rabbi from Satmar, who spoke very highly in reverence of the work that shluchim do around the world, going out and sharing, Torah and mitzvahs, Judaism with Jews all around the world in these remote places. And so someone responded and said, well, if you value that and you see how good it is, why don't you send your people to do it? And his response was, as the story goes, I don't have the shoulders that the Lubavitcher Rebbe has. I don't have broad enough shoulders to take responsibility of all of my followers going out there and embedding themselves and getting involved. I can't take that responsibility. So, and the Rebbe was able to take that responsibility and does take that responsibility. So, but that doesn't mean that the other side of the coin is not there. It's there. So, the message here in the name Shmois is that yes, the purpose of all of existence is for the universe, for every part of the universe, as much as possible of the universe to be elevated, to integrate divinity into as much as possible of the universe. which necessarily depends on the agents who are executing this mission interacting with the world to integrate divinity into the world through their interactions, to elevate the world through their interactions. And the message here is, remember, when the Jewish people went into Egypt, and it was as brutal an oppression as there has ever been. As brutal a slavery as there has ever been. At the end of the day, the truth of who every one of them was never subject to Egypt. It was never subject to the challenges of Egypt. It was never subject to the influence of Egypt. It was never at risk even for a moment. Because who we are is that our truest identity, who we actually are inside beneath all the layers, is absolute infinity, pure, unadulterated divinity, godliness. That's who we are deep down inside. And that's not subject to anything, ever. Now, layered on top of that are the various layers of the soul, and the different layers of our identity, and the different parts of our identities, and our experiences, and all of those things are layered on top of that. All of those things relative to who we are like, metaphorically, a name. Those are, the layers of our identity are names that are associated with who we really are deep down inside, but it isn't who we really are deep down inside. Our thoughts, our speech, our actions, our perception, the way we think, the way we feel, all the different parts and layers of our identities. None of those things are us, right? They are our identity, the identity of us, the identity that belongs to us, the identity that is layered upon who we are beneath it. And so the message that this is telling us is, and this is why it's the name of the whole book. This whole book is about various stages. Stage one is the slavery in Egypt. Interacting with the land of Egypt, every part of it, every layer, as deep down as it could be. 2, elevate sparks. When that was done, we left Egypt, we went into the desert, we got the Torah to continue through the desert and elevate sparks in the desert, and then onto the land of Israel, etc., and to continue that work. So if this book, the second book of Shmos, of Genesis, is about the work, the interaction into the world, the elevation of sparks of divinity, the elevation of the world, the integration of divinity into the world, and this work, by definition, necessarily, the more deeply we're doing the work, the greater the risk, the greater the difficulty, the greater the challenges, because we're subjecting ourselves to something that is opposite in terms of values and perception to our values and perception, which is why we want to share our values and perception with it. And so this whole book, all of this mission and all the stages of it, the title, the one-word title that shares the message of the whole book with us is Shmos. It's just the names. When you go out into the world, the real you is never at risk. Who you are cannot be touched by anyone or anything ever. It cannot be sullied, it cannot be adulterated, it cannot be jeopardized, it cannot be hurt, it cannot be touched. It's only ever the name, the exterior layers that are specific and unique and associated with each individual personally, individually, but it's not the person. The person always remains there inside. Who we are remains inside, it remains the truth of who we are, and it always remains intact, unadulterated, untouched. So we always have that inside. It's only ever the name, the secondary parts that are interacting with the world, etc. And there's a second very important part of this message in the fact that we say it's Ve'ele Shmos B'nei Yisroel, Habai Mitzrayim. These are the names that are coming into Egypt. It's the name that comes into Egypt. And then the Torah goes on to enumerate all the names. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, name, a bunch of individual specific names, one at a time. Why? Because if everyone that went into Egypt was the same, if everyone that went into Egypt was just clones of the same Mendy, it was all just, if it was 70 clones, you don't need 70 of them, you just have one. Hashem didn't want 70 clones. Hashem wanted 70 different people to come in because there are lots of different things that need to happen. There are lots of different parts of the work, different parts of the elevation that need to happen, different parts of the integration. And each person who came in had their own unique set of gifts and challenges and strengths and weaknesses, all of which were designed intentionally as a package to make a specific necessary contribution to this mission, to this purpose. And each person had a name that was individual, that referred to them as an individual. And remember, the function of the name is not just to refer to the person. A big part of the function of a name is to distinguish between people, which is why, if everybody has the same name, the names become useless to a degree. And the Torah tells us the names came in. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, separate, specific, individual, distinct names, because the work that had to be done in Egypt needed each of them to come in as the individual they are. Reuven and Shimon didn't both need to come to Egypt for the exact same thing. Because if they did, Hashem just would have made one of them and we wouldn't have needed the other one.
Would have been 11 Shvatim.
Right. And if there was one thing that needed to be done, if all 70 people who came to Egypt were supposed to do the same thing, there would have been one, not 7, not 70. Hashem brought 70 people to the land of Egypt because there were 70 different jobs that needed to be done. And this is why it says these are the names and enumerates the names to let us know each of these people as an individual, distinguished from everyone else in the fact that they had a unique and different name, all of them had to come down to Egypt. And if Reuven would have been busy trying to emulate Shimon, trying to be Shimon, and Shimon was busy trying to be Reuven, I mean, if they succeeded, they would have just swapped. But let's say that if Reuven was the one that they all look up to, hypothetically, and then all the brothers were just like, okay, let's all try to be like him, but Hashem could have just made Reuven and sent him down to Egypt. All the other people are missing the point. If Hashem wanted you to be him, Hashem wouldn't have created you. He would have just created him. And if he needed 2, he would have made a clone of him. He didn't. He made you. And it's such a common and deeply challenging pitfall, which is to get caught up in trying to be more like other people. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that looking at a strength that someone else has and aspiring to learn from that and to emulate that specific thing is not a good thing. It is. The place where it becomes clearly like wrong and missing the point and defeating the purpose, or a place, and maybe clearly is a little bit overstated, but if a person, has gifts and a personality that has a lot to offer, and they just feel like, but like that person's personality and the gifts that they have are so much better. I want to try to I'm not going to focus on my gifts and what I have to offer, even though no one else can offer what I can offer, but I wish I was more like that person. I'm going to try to do what they're doing. Hashem would have given you the same name and made you the same person if that's what he wanted. Now, sometimes that can happen from envy, from jealousy, in which case those things are challenges that, that are their own conversation. But it can also come from a misunderstanding. Oh, look, that person and their gifts make for such a greater contribution than the gifts that I have. And even though I can offer something that no one else, I can bring something to the world that no one else can bring, but like what that person can bring is so much better. And so therefore I'm going to neglect the unique thing that I can bring and try to do what they can bring as well and to copy that. There it's coming from something that is virtuous in intent, but grossly mistaken. The Torah tells us these are the names who came in and counts and doesn't just give us a number, it enumerates name by name. These names have already been enumerated multiple times, most of them multiple times, every one of them at least once previously in Sefer Bereshis. We've had all the names before. When they came down to Egypt, we knew the names. So once they're already in Egypt, and all these years later, after Yaakov passed away, and now Yosef passed away, and all this time later, it's like, oh, by the way, these are the names of the people who came into Egypt all of those years ago. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, the 70 children and descendants of Yaakov. Why? Why the need to go back and tell us all of that? And the answer is because this is the beginning of the book of Shemos, the book of the work, that focuses on the work and the mission. And when one of the first things that we have to know and remain clear and have clear, and remember, this is fundamental to us fulfilling our purpose, is every single one of them came in with a name that distinguished them from each of the others, because every one of them was there to bring something that the others were not there to bring. And it's so easy and common and can be so tempting and misleading, the urge, the desire to want to try to be more like someone else instead of thinking about how to embrace who we are and the things that we have to offer to the world. And so it starts off and says, the number one thing, the name of the book is Shmos. Names, individual names, and it goes on to enumerate every single name to distinguish. Every one of them had their own name that distinguished them from each other. Because the moment that we would rather be someone else, or we would rather imitate someone else rather than embrace who we are number one, in a sense, denying the fact that Hashem didn't make a mistake when he designed us. We are prioritizing what we want over the reason Hashem brought us into the world. Now, the reason I'm saying these things that are strong and negative is not to judge or to criticize. It's to emphasize the fact that if this is coming from a place that is well-intentioned, stop and realize the intentions might be positive, they might be virtuous in intent, but they're very wrong. Hashem didn't make any mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that whatever we feel like we should just embrace and do because this is the way Hashem created us. No, a part of that is sometimes part of why we're here is to work on parts of our personality. That being said, to effectively and successfully refine, adjust, guide, modify, develop parts of our personality, the reality is that if we resent those parts of ourselves and we judge ourselves for them, the likelihood of actually affecting real transformation is approximately 0.00%. Approximately. The more we can accept, okay, this is something that ideally down the road should, let's say, be developed, should be changed, should be whatever it is. Hashem, part of the purpose of existence is for me to embark on that journey and to affect those adjustments, those developments, etc. The more deeply and genuinely I accept, okay, so if this is part of who I am, then this is supposed to be part of who I am, and now it's my job to figure out what I should do about it. The more we can accept and embrace that, the more effective and successful we're going to be at actually doing the thing that we're supposed to do with it. And it's directly proportional. The deeper and the more genuine the acceptance and the embracing of the fact that if this is part of who we are, it's supposed to be. It doesn't mean that therefore we just go with it, but it does mean that it's not a mistake and we shouldn't resent it or judge ourselves. The less we judge ourselves, the less we resent it, the more we genuinely and deeply accept that if this is here, it's supposed to be here. Now it's our job to work with it, to make progress, to develop, etc. The more successfully we're going to be able to actually do that. And I mean, the evidence for this is abundantly clear. So, super concisely, this entire book is called Shmois Names. There are two enormously and deeply important and powerful messages here. One is, when you get out there and there are challenges and things, the real you is never touched by anything. It's only ever the layers on top that are touched, the names. These are the names that came down into Egypt. And number two is the names, individual, unique names that differentiate each individual from the rest. That is what came into Egypt. We are here to be individuals, to be unique. And the more that we can embrace the individual that we are and all the parts of who we are and accept them. Embrace them doesn't mean celebrate this and just, okay, so this is how it's going to be forever and the way it's supposed to be. No, it means embrace the fact that this is what it is now and it's supposed to be the way it is now. And I don't resent it and I don't judge myself and I don't criticize it because clearly it's supposed to be. And if I think it's not supposed to be, then I think Hashem made a mistake, and that is called kfira, denying the truth of Hashem. So the more we can accept, genuinely and deeply accept that if this is the way it is, this is the way it's supposed to be now, and figuring out the pathway forward and embarking on that journey is a clearly a fundamental part of why I'm here. So let's do that. And don't resent it and don't wish I was more like someone else, because if I was supposed to be more like someone else, I would be more like someone else. And so the Torah says, these are the names who came in, and tells every single name, and they're all different because we're supposed to be different. And the more we embrace the individual that we are and all the things that come together to make us who we are and all the parts of our experience and our environment and our life and our journey, the more successfully we're going to do what we're here to do. And so the Torah says, at the outset, at the beginning of the work, it says these are the names. The names came in, and these are the names. Unique, different individuals. Everyone is supposed to be individual and unique. That's why the names are enumerated. Don't forget it. Don't make that mistake of thinking that it would be better if you were more like someone else. And again, it doesn't mean don't aspire to learn from other people in specific ways. But don't wish you were less like yourself and more like them. Because that's only ever going to hurt your chances, substantially hurt your chances of actually doing what you're here for. Question?
So it's easy, relatively easy to read the Parsha, see each person and understand that, okay, these are places that they struggle with, and this is how they've honed themselves and their midos that they've worked on, and they're really serving Hashem. It's so much harder in our lives to be able to see that and see like, okay, these midos need work. This is exactly how Hashem wants it to be, and I just need to work on loving. Like, does my question kind of make sense?
Oh, your question makes so much sense. You know what's also easier and harder? It's easier to look at someone else's challenge and to say, you know what? It's supposed to be. It has a purpose. Just you have everything you need to get through it. Just it's easy to say that to someone else in their challenge. It's a lot harder when it's our challenge, right? So these things are part of the challenge itself, right? And when we look within ourselves and it's like, hang on a second, okay, so am I supposed to embrace this and figure out how to work with it? Am I supposed to like try to get past this and put it behind me? So I would say a few things. Number one, sometimes it could be relatively clear if we look in Shulchan Aruch, if we look in Chassidus, if we ask, a teacher, a mentor, someone, sometimes it might become quite clear. And sometimes, part of the journey is trying to figure that out. And if we are on the journey of trying to figure it out, then we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And if along that journey we're like, I think this is the approach, and then down the road it's like, yeah, it looks like that kind of really wasn't, let me veer a little to the other way. And then maybe it's like, yeah, this is more like, and it's like, whoa, I overshot a little, let me try to come back a little bit more towards the middle. If all of those things happen as part of us making an effort to make the most of who we are, then every single step along that way, we've been doing exactly what we were supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to get it right. We're supposed to do the work. And the reality of the work is that it's messy and it's trying to figure it out. And there might be things, some things you move through and over time you get clarity and you figure it out. And there are some things that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be bouncing back and forth both sides of the line, a bit this way, a bit that way, a bit this way, a bit that way. And you know what? If every step of that bouncing back and forth, and there are some things that, it's like alternating current or a heartbeat, right? Our hearts contract and expand, contract and expand. You look at a heart monitor, right? It's not like, really the heart is supposed to be average right in the middle, but it can't find that middle, so it keeps going in and out, in and out, in and out, and trying to find that balance. No. If the heart stopped right in the middle, that would be really bad. It's supposed to go in and out, in and out, in and out, contract, expand, and then it pulls blood in and pumps it out, pulls blood in, pumps it out, right? So now this is obviously a little more abstract, but in our journeys, there may be some parts of our journey where ultimately the correct way of approaching it is doing the best we can to figure it out. And some things we may never get clarity. It may be that it's always supposed to look like a little bit this way, then a little bit that way, a little bit this way. And maybe we never find the balance. But if we're working on the balance, then every time we overshoot, we were doing exactly what we were supposed to be doing. And that's perfect. Because that's why we're here. So the fact that it's complicated, different, challenging, messy, everything is much more difficult, challenging, and messy when we're talking about for ourselves in our own experience rather than observing someone else in a storybook, obviously, right? But in a sense, maybe that's the power here to remember, right, but for the person who's going to be reading my story, the person who's looking at me from the outside, I'm the third person, and it's less difficult for them to see that in me than it is for them to see it in themselves, the same way that it's more difficult for me to see it in myself than it is for me to see it in someone else. But it doesn't make it any less or more true. It's just that it's part of our challenge, so it's more challenging. But that doesn't make it any less correct or true. And sometimes the challenge is the journey and the purpose.